Welcome back, everyone. As you have seen in the video about the public-private partnership, I hope you're really constant, because if you really got to understand that video, you'll get a brief idea about what's meant by PPP. Let's review it together. What are the main projects where government might think of being or getting into a partnership with the private sector? Usually, as you have seen in the video, it's in big infrastructure project like sewage system or whatever. So something that requires a lot of finance, something that requires sharing of construction, finance, and operation with the private sector. So the question here, who's the owner? Is it the private sector or the state? The answer is it's the state, of course. The state continues to be the owner and it's accountable for the provision of the delivery of the service. So what is the role of the private sector in that case? The private sector will be responsible mainly for the finance, design, building and operation and maintenance of the project. But we said previously that the private sector is working for profit. So how do they get their money back? Okay, so they can get their money back through the service fees, either to be paid by the government or by the users themselves. So here the role of the government, that it sets the stage, the plans, open a competition between different tenders, and then it chooses the one that sees that it's more suitable for going into a partnership with. So its role here, the government, is that it supervises them. So why the government might think of getting into a PPP? Because it might think of getting benefits of the strengths of the private sector, helping being cost efficient, having a better operation of the project. And as you have seen also in the video, it was talking about the different risks of being involved in a PPP. So some of these risks will be the responsibility of the government, some of them will be on the private sector, and some of them will be shared. Of course, any changes in regulations will be, or any changes in the legal framework, any risks is due to that will be the responsibility of the government. Let's take an example. If, for example, the government have entered in a partnership with a certain private company, and the tax law was a certain percentage, and then after a couple of years there have been some changes in the law, so it asked for more taxes on that company, then the government has to be the one who handles that issue, because that change is in regulation. It's not a fault of the private company. But what about the risks that should be held by the private company? It's the risks related to the design. So if something went wrong with the design, it has to be the responsibility of the private company to handle it. Also, the risks related to the cost-efficient investment, risks related to the operations or the technology. Okay, so these risks are part of the private sector responsibility. Then, from that video, we can see that the PPP may provide a better service at a lower cost. However, as anything in the world, there are also some challenges that are related to the PPP. What are they? The first challenge that I assume that it might came to your mind is that when the government enter into a partnership with a private company, they have to consider that the private firms are actually working to make profit. We said that the main goal, as we have talked in chapter 1, that the main goal of the private company is to make profit, while the main goal for the public organization is to serve the citizens, satisfy the people, provide the service for them, and so on. So here, that could be a challenge, because all the time the government might be wanting to do that project or enter into the PPP to deliver a certain service for the citizens, while the company, the private company, is actually looking for profit. And that might affect the prices, might affect the quality of the service delivered to the people, that might affect their satisfaction level, that will in turn affect their satisfactions with the government. So that's a challenge, one of the challenges facing the PPP. Another challenge is related to, has a relation with what we call some moral issues. What do I mean by this? Let's take some examples. Maybe the government will be giving some favoritisms to companies that already it has some contracts with before. In other words, if the government in a certain country have made a contract with company X in this year, and then after a couple of years it wanted to enter in a new PP, it will give preference to company X compared to company Y and Z. So like that's kind of a favoritism to that company because it had already worked well with it before and maybe know the system and so on. But in that case, it will be kind of causing some kind of discrimination against other countries, other companies, I'm sorry. Also, we are speaking about another moral issue is related to that the PPP usually will be giving preferences to large firms over small firms, meaning usually because as we have said, that the PPP always about big project, infrastructure project, requires a lot of finance. So it's not required for small firms. It's not expected from small firms to be able to handle this. So that in that case, that will be always the government will be giving preferences for large firms compared to small firms. And that's a moral issue. Another moral issue is that we may see some corrupt behavior of some government officials that will be granting contracts to certain private companies without following their legal requirements. In other words, maybe because as we see in the PPP, you have to follow by certain requirements. The government set the stage and the plan, then it opens for different tenders to produce and compare between them and follow certain steps. Maybe some government officials in certain countries will not follow these requirements. They will just go directly to grant some contracts to certain private companies, and that's gonna be a kind of corruption. So that's also will be considered some of the challenges facing the PPP. A third challenge is related to accountability. Do you remember when we have talked in chapter 1 that public administrators are accountable to the legislatures and the legislators are accountable to the people who will elect them? And then we added up now also administrators are accountable directly to the people who will be also still can be evaluating them and so on. And that's are considered the traditional mechanisms of accountability. But here, when we are having a project or a program that's going to be delivered by a private company, how can we hold that company accountable? How people can hold that company accountable? Because now the government is not directly running the program, unlike any public program. The government is not running it. So who will be responsible for the success or failure? Who will be held accountable for this? That's a critical challenge, a critical issue. That's why we have said that you have to consider this. Another challenge is related to responsiveness. Responsiveness, do you remember when we also in chapter 1 talked about responsiveness versus efficiency? And we said when one of the videos that we have watched that was talking about that the private sector is more efficient and so on. So we also said here we might be involved in a public-private partnership because we are looking for the cost efficiency and the cost efficient investment of the private sector. So we're looking for efficiency here. But how about responsiveness? How can we guarantee that we are actually responding to the citizens' need. We are doing our main role as a public organization, as the government, of being responding to the people. So that's a key challenge that facing the public-private partnership. Does it mean that because of these challenges, the government shouldn't be involved in PPP? Of course not. But it means that when you start writing your contract of the PPP, or you're thinking of being involved in the PPP, please consider these points and try to avoid or try to find a way to overcome. Like, for example, if you're talking about the issues of moral issues, for example, so try to follow the legal requirements. Don't always give favoritism to the company that you have already had a contract with before. If you're talking about accountability, for example, make sure when you're writing the contract of the PPP, how will you be able to hold that private company accountable for the work, for the achievement of the objectives, and so on. So you have to try to find good ways of holding them accountable for their delivery of the service or the production or whatever. Also, you have to think about ways that can ensure that you will be responsive to the citizen. So in that case, we don't say anything in the word. It has good things and bad things. So you have to try to control. You're using different means and different tools when you are considering being involved in a PPP. Okay, so so far in this lecture, as you see, we started talking about in chapter 3 about networks, and that the public employees and in their while they are working on public programs, they depend on networks, they depend on the relationship with different actors who will be involved with them in the process of the public policy process and in running the programs. And managing that network is very hard. It's not easy because we're not speaking about hierarchy here. We're speaking about people from different groups. Even that network could be formal or informal. And then we talked about the NGOs, and we spoke about their role in the public policy process and how they will be involved in the different stages of the policy process. And then we talked about privatization, and as I said, I just want you to understand the definitions and why some countries might privatize. And then we talked about the PPP and the different factors that you should be considered when you are involving in a PPP. And then we spoke about the different challenges of public-private partnership. In the coming lecture, we will be starting to talk about how do we manage a non-profit organizations? What are the different factors that we need to consider when we are running or when we are establishing a non-profit or organizations? We're going to speak about what we call operational leadership, resource development, financial management, board governance, and board staff relation. So to sum it up for this part, please listen to the audio and read this part from your book. Combine between both. Don't depend only on the audio, please. I hope you're doing great, and stay safe and stay at home. Thank you so much. Bye bye.